There was a peasant in Russia by the name of Pahom, a simple, humble, hard-working family man who was quite content with his lot, though life was tough and he always had to live from hand to mouth. One day, reflecting upon his situation in life, he thought, if only I had some land of my own instead of having to till somebody else's land on rent, I'd be perfectly happy and I wouldn't be afraid of the devil himself. Now, the devil was listening and snickered to himself and said, "All right, I'll give you land, lots of land, and then I'll get you in my power." And so it happened that Pakhom had a chance to buy a little land in his neighborhood with the small savings that he had. He worked very hard, doubly hard on it, and the rains were good and the crops were plentiful. And within 2 years, he had paid off his debt. And now he was happy because he was a free landholder. But very soon he grew discontented with his lot again because he was jealous of other people among his neighbors who owned much more land than he did, and they often interfered with his work and complained against him because he was so snooty, and went to the judges because he wouldn't let them graze their cattle on his land, even for a fee. And sooner or later he started thinking that I must move away to some place where I'll have much more land and where I can be truly master of myself and my life. And it so happened that some people told him about a place far away on the other side of the Volga in the east, where land was plentiful and very fertile, and if he could work hard, he would reap bumper harvests year after year. It would take some money, and it would be a very long journey, but he scrounged all he could. He sold off some of his cattle, he sold off his wife's jewelry, and he traveled all the way, first by steamer and then on foot for many days at a stretch until he reached that land he had heard about. And truly, he found very good land there, and he bought several hundred acres of it. And although he was deeply in debt, and therefore he had to live alone for a couple of years there, again living from hand to mouth, while his wife somehow made do with whatever little savings she had at home. But 2 or 3 years later, he had broken even, and he brought his family over and he built a nice homestead for himself, and now he was truly a very comfortable, even rich landowner. He should have been perfectly happy with his situation now. But then, one day, a visitor came and he played host, and this visitor told him about a fabulous land several hundred miles to the east again, over the Ural Mountains, where, in the land of a tribe called the Bashkirs, land was not only infinite, but also of the best quality. And apparently the Bashkirs were very simple people. They did not understand trade or business. They did not understand profits. And they virtually gave away all the land if anybody came and asked nicely. And at first, Pakhom did not believe this man, but when he saw the title deeds of the several thousand acres that he had bought for a song, his greed was ignited, and he decided, I must go there and I must buy much land for myself. What I have, the few hundred acres here, is nothing compared to what this man has told me about. So again, he arranged for a lot of presents to be given to the Bashkirs, and he made another arduous journey. And when he reached the Bashkir land, true enough, they welcomed him very cheerfully, very warmly, and they really truly seemed to be very humble and simple people. They sang and danced and ate and lived off their fat cattle and sheep and goats, which they grazed on the land. And for the most part, they hardly did any work at all. They did not cultivate any land, although they had so much of it. And when he gave them gifts, they were delighted, and they treated him even better, and they called their chief to come and talk to him, and the chief asked him in Russian. He was the only person who could speak Russian there. The chief asked him, "What do you want?" And he said, "I have heard from someone that you sell land here. Is that true? I would like to buy some land for myself." And the chief said, "Yes, you can have all the land that you want." And Pakhom said, "Well then, let's decide on a price. What is your price?" And the chief said that our price is always the same. It is 1,000 rubles a day. Now, Pakhom was very surprised because he had never heard a price quoted in such terms. He said, 1,000 rubles a day, what does that mean? Tell me how much it is per acre, per hectare. And the chief said, we don't calculate like that. You see, we decide that you start walking at daybreak and you come back by sundown, by the time the sun sets, to the spot where you had started from. And all the land you have encircled would be yours for 1,000 rubles. And Pakhom was amazed, absolutely flabbergasted. He thought, I am a young, strong, virile man. In one day I can walk 30, 35 miles. I will have tens of thousands of acres for just 1,000 rubles. Now it so happened that all the cash he had brought with him did amount to 1,000 rubles. He knew that he would have nothing left, not even the money to go back home if that cash was forfeited. But his mind was aflame with desire because he knew that he would become one of the greatest landholders in Russia in a day if he could somehow perform this ordeal. So that entire night he could not sleep. He had a nightmare where he saw the Bashkirs laughing among themselves and rolling on the ground with glee, and he saw people changing shape. Once he saw the first landowner whom he had bought the land, and she was joking with the visitor who had come to him to tell him about the wonderful land of the Bashkirs. And then he saw the Bashkir chief laughing and laughing over something that lay on the ground, and it seemed to him like a dead body. And when he went closer in his dream, he saw that the dead body was his. And he awoke with a start, and he was all in a sweat. And he clapped his forehead and said, what nasty and stupid things people see in a dream. But in any case, he could not sleep anymore, so he got up very early when it was still dark, and he called up the Bashkirs because he was in a tearing hurry to set off. And the Bashkirs went along with him, laughing and singing and playing their flutes, and they climbed a hillock. And the Bashkir chief sat down and he threw his cap on the ground and said, put your money here, the 1,000 rubles. You can take a little bread with you and a little water and nothing else. My men will follow you, of course, at a distance. As you keep walking, they will put markers. They will dig holes and plant markers on the ground, and all the land you will have covered by sundown will be yours. And Pakhom said, all right, then I won't wait. There's the sun coming up above the horizon. The sky has turned red. I'm going to set off right now. And so he set off at an easy pace towards where the sun was rising. Now for a while, an hour or two, he walked very comfortably. He was feeling very cheerful and very fresh and very fit. And there was a gentle, soft breeze, and he was whistling to himself, and he was very happy. And the farther he went, the more excited he became. My God, how much land I'm going to own very soon. And so he kept walking and he kept walking until the sun rose higher on the horizon and he started sweating. So he took off his coat and threw it away. And after a while he decided, I'm going to take off my boots too, because that will make it easier for me to walk. And then by the time the sun was very hot, he had walked so far that he could hardly see the hillock, let alone the people standing on it. He could hardly see the hillock, but he thought that I must wait. I must rest a little and I must have my breakfast. So he waited for his breakfast, sat down for his breakfast, and he kept on walking again until it was so hot that he was beginning to feel tired. So he sat down for a bite of lunch and a little water. His back had begun to ache and his feet were really hurting him because he had walked so far barefoot. But he didn't dare fall asleep because if he fell asleep, he might not awaken soon enough. And then he started walking again. And after a point when the sun was low on the horizon and he was almost exhausted, he thought, I must really turn back and cut a straight route back to the hillock. I have walked too far. But then he saw a lovely piece of lake and soft ground beside it where wonderful flax crops would grow. And he was too tempted to avoid it. So he made a detour again, a couple of extra miles. And by the time he had come round the lake, it was slowly growing dark and the sun was beginning to set. And now he panicked because the hillock was still so far away. So he began running, although he was panting and he was sweating and his feet were bleeding from the exertion. He started running because he had to somehow reach the hillock before it was too late. And, well, dark circles danced before his eyes and there was a tremendous throbbing inside his head, and it felt as if a terrible, painful hammer was beating against his chest, and his legs were feeling like lead. He could hardly drag them forward. And as he neared the hillock, he saw the Bashkirs cheering and clapping. They were all on their feet. They were urging him on, and they said, "Come on, come on." He could hear their shouts faintly, and he fell and he stumbled and he got up and he fell again, and he started praying, please God, I have made so much land. I'm such a rich man. Please God, allow me to reach that hill, the top of the hill." And by the time he had reached the foot of the hill, it was dark. And he said, my God, I have killed myself and yet have lost everything. Please, dear God. And yet the Bashkirs were cheering him and calling him up. And he realized that since they were at a higher altitude, they could see the sun still, though it was dark for him. And he desperately scrambled and fell down, and he could not get up again. And he crawled on his chest, on his belly, and he screamed and he prayed, and he could feel the blood trickling down his nose, but somehow he reached the top of the hill and fell at the foot of the Bashkir chief and died. The Bashkir chief got up, took the money out of his cap, put the cap back on his head, turned the dead body with his foot, and said, "Bury him. He's got all the land that he needed. 6 feet of soil. No man needs more than that." Now this story, "How much land does a man need?" is taken from 23 Tales from Count Leo Tolstoy. This has been one of the most shaping influences of my life, and it has stayed with me ever since I read it when I had barely reached my teens. I often say that if someone wants to learn the very essence of Christianity, the very essence of any religion, you can do little better than read these stories about what it means to be religious, to be spiritual, and not to be carried away by the 7 deadly sins, chief among which is greed. The story, I think, is more relevant than ever in this age that we are living in, where every fool around us is desperately chasing wealth, thinking that that would solve everything, even if it otherwise ruins his or her life. So take heed, reflect, remember, and take heed.